Okay, I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Boulder Valley Board of Education for Tuesday, April 14th, 2020. Laura, would you please call the roll?
Garcia,
Here.
Gebhardt. Here. Marquis,
Here.
Myers. Here. Sargent,
Here.
Sweeney Moran,
Here.
Zis,
Here.
Okay. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge
I pledge the allegiance to the flag
of the
of the United States of America and to the republic
for which
it
which it
stands,
stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and
and
justice for all.
justice for all. All right. Well, that was pretty good. So I'd like to remind everybody that the mission of the Boulder Valley School District is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children thrive and are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives. So welcome to all those who are joining us this evening for our first fully electronic board meeting, and certainly the first that I've ever participated in. I just want to thank all the staff and Laura and Andrew, Patricia, all the people who helped put this together. It took a lot of work. And I think it's amazing some of the things that we're able to do in these really unusual conditions that surround us as we wait out the coronavirus. So one of the first things we need to do as a board is to start by taking action on Board Policy BEAA, electronic participation in school board meetings, in anticipation of the need for school boards to meet virtually during the pandemic. There was a change from the state to allow school boards to meet electronically without having a majority of the board physically together, which is what our policy read prior. We have altered our policy in accordance with recommended policy from CASB and from the state to allow us to have a quorum electronically. So do we have a motion to approve board policy BAA, the corrections that are on board docs? Moved by Kitty. Do we have a second? By Kathy, thank you. And any questions or discussion about this board policy? Richard? Richard?
I'm not fast enough to go back from mute to unmute. Sorry about that. On the board policy, if you look at paragraph 1, the second paragraph. Wait a minute, am I looking at the right one? Third paragraph. Now, this is electronic participation in school board meetings, and it says, a meeting at which one or more board members attend and participate. This is different from if two board members meet, physically.
Yeah,
For
this
example,
is
for
a board
sunshine
meeting.
law purposes, it says anytime you have three or more board members meeting together, you have to post it. Now, this says a meeting at which one or more. Can you explain that just a little bit?
Kathleen?
Sure, we didn't adjust that language, but your point is well taken. That we do have a separate policy on meetings of the board that states the definition of a meeting under open meetings law. So this policy would not change this. That reference one or more is just to how the board member is participating. That's what it references. So one or board members are participating through an electronic means. That's what the reference means in that sentence.
So that doesn't include board members emailing. If I email a board member.
No, this doesn't modify our obligations under the open meetings law and make something that isn't ordinarily a meeting.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments about this change in this policy? Okay, hearing none. Laura, would you please call the vote on the motion?
Garcia,
Yes.
Gebhardt,
Yes.
Marquis,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Sargent,
Yes.
Sweeney Moran,
Yes.
Sis.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so the next item that we're going to is the superintendent's report. And this is going to be a little bit of a different format. Rob is going to go over some topics, but he's going to have different members of staff address topics, especially as we go through different aspects of the impacts of the pandemic. And after each person speaks, we'll have questions. So we're going to be interrupting this report because it might go on long, and we want board members to have a chance to address their questions on the spot. So with that, Dr. Anderson.
Thank you, Board President Marquis, members of the board. It's good to see everyone here this evening. And it's amazing what technology can do. And it's hard to think just about a month ago, we were really making the tough decision to close schools, and that we've been, most of us in the district have been working remotely for close to a month. So I'd like to start, we're going to get into a coronavirus, a COVID-19 update for the board and for the public. But I'd be remiss if I didn't start with just genuine thank yous. I would have to tell you that there are a few moments in my career or my life where I've been as grateful and thankful and proud as I am, and I have been over this past week with our board, with our staff, with our employees, our parents, our school board, our students, our community, our critical partners, impact on education, Boulder County Public Health. It's truly been amazing for me to watch all of us come together and begin home learning, food distribution, serving our most vulnerable families, really putting our best foot forward and making sure that we had the IT infrastructure and devices so students could access home learning. So you're going to hear a lot of updates about where we are today, but I would tell you overwhelmingly, I couldn't be more proud to be superintendent and of the team that will be speaking to you all this evening. And so with that, I'd like to start by asking Stephanie Farron to join us virtually and give the board and community an update on health services. Stephanie.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Anderson. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for having me tonight to come and give you a little bit of update of what we've been doing. I hope that you and your families and everyone that's listening are healthy and safe, sheltered at home right now. As you're all aware, this has been an extraordinary time, and I want to echo what Dr. Anderson said. It's really been humbling to work with everybody in the district on our preparations, to see the response carried out, and now to be working on planning our recovery for getting back to what we hope will be some normalcy in the future. Quickly, just to give you an idea of numbers, our first case in Colorado was reported on March the 5th, and we now have almost 8,000 cases here in Colorado. Almost 300 in Boulder County and 81 in city and county of Broomfield. Jeff Ziak from Public Health was on a call this afternoon and spoke a little bit about the hospitalizations across the state and really showed us some impressive graphs that show that is beginning to level off. They have seen a few days now of hospitalizations beginning to sort of plateau. And if that continues for 14 days, then there will really be some significant data to show that the spread is beginning to slow here in Colorado due to all of the social distancing and everything that we've been doing. The other thing that Mr. Ziak said was, even though we are not getting clear direction from the state, most school districts should be planning for remote learning throughout the rest of the school year. And, the district has done a really fantastic job rolling out the home learning. And I know that there'll be more talk about that. And even when we do open our communities back up again, that will be a very slow process. It will take quite a while to lift all those restrictions. And it really probably won't be until we have a vaccine that is readily available to everybody that we'll be able to really see things opened up and not have restrictions like we've had in the past. So again, as you know, public health has been the lead agency in this emergency because it is a health emergency, and our response has been ongoing. We're now finally beginning to enter into that recovery phase, and there is a lot of planning that's going on. Our metro area public health directors are working with the Centers for Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment to look at how to lift those restrictions, and they're really focusing on 3 key conditions. Those are expanded testing, so that we can really see what's happening in the community effectively, be able to identify disease quickly. Containment, so while you have this increased testing, public health will then need a workforce large enough to actually be able to follow up on all that testing, quarantine folks and isolate them, and then be able to support them while they're at home. And then finally, surveillance and monitoring so that we can really very quickly, effectively track what's happening in the community and prevent any surges in virus. So as we look to the future, the vaccine will be a very important part of bringing us back to some semblance of a normal life that we had before this happened. And as we look to summer and fall to school, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about what that will look like, and we really don't know yet. There's quite a lot of different circumstances and varying things that we'll be looking at as we sort of base our, you know, modeling. We anticipate that there will still be physical distancing, that there'll be increased screening, and of course testing. We'll probably need much stringent, more stringent illness protocols, and also options for blended learning. So if we have students or family members that are under quarantine or isolated, that we're able to, you know, assist them also. So there'll be a lot of planning as to what that looks like. The CDE and CDPHE are working with our local public health departments also on developing some of that guidance. And we've begun here at the district to really look across the world to see what folks have done in other countries and how they're beginning to open schools up again and some of the lessons that they're learning. As far as health services, what we've really been focused on over the last few weeks is a lot of standard operating procedures and infection control procedures, things to make sure that our staff are safe when they are working, the essential staff, and when they're interacting with our community. So we have screening procedures, return to work procedures, lots of infection control procedures and policies, and then really looking at guidances around some of the main work that we're continuing to do that has interaction with staff and the community, such as the food distribution that's happening, the childcare, and our maintenance and custodial folks that are still in the buildings. We've worked on safety protocols for distribution, and we're also, like I mentioned, really now focusing on return to school protocols with state and local partners. Overall, it's been really, again, an incredible amount of work, and it's been wonderful to see this team come together. I've learned an incredible amount from them, and I hope that they've learned a little bit about how important health is to our school and our community also. Thank you.
Okay, and shall I ask for questions, Rob? Am I ready to go?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, and thank you so much for being so, having so much information and being so transparent about the uncertainty as we move into moving forward, because that is a question on every parent's mind. is what does this look like and what do we know? And I think it's just so honest to say we don't really know yet. So thank you. So I'll go down alphabetically. Richard, any questions?
Yeah, just a very quick question. I heard you say social distancing, I think when the regular school year starts. Did I hear you say that? And if you did say that, what would that look like?
That is a possibility. And it's something that has already begun to happen even before some schools close down. Sometimes it can look at staggering times for children in school. It can mean having lunches where students, again, are spaced out more so that there's
She froze.
Yeah.
Yep, I think we've lost her. She'll probably join us back in.
I can address that, Richard. I would say that we're going to work closely with Boulder County Public Health to see what that might look like. Depending upon where we are over the course of the next couple of months, we're just going to have to get comfortable being uncomfortable and making new and different decisions for our kids and to make sure that they're safe, but that we're pressing forward with learning. Right. And if we're able to come back, I think that there's lots of strategies you can potentially use. We aren't committing to any of those at this point in time. I think that the smart thing to do is let's watch how this information unfolds. Once the health officials tell us what types of parameters that we might need to put in place when we come back, and whether it's social distancing, the size of groups, the ability for folks to interact and what are the limitations, then we'll take that back to our team and bring proposals forward. I will share this, and I want you to hear this, I want our community to hear this, that we are going to take every single precaution necessary to make sure that our kids are safe, that our family's safe, that our community is safe. And we're waiting and working with local health officials, but my priority will be safety. And so I want you as a board to know that the recommendations that I bring forward will make sure that safety is first and foremost. And so hopefully that answers your question, Stephanie. I know that you timed out, and then you came back in. So if there's anything else you'd like to add.
Hey, Kathy. Okay. Donna?
My quick question is, how are we handling the daycare situation right now? What protocol, what procedures are in place?
right now we have screening protocols for all the staff as well as the students. So everybody is screened every day.
Okay. Should I move on?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lisa? Okay, and Stacy. And Kitty. Okay. All right, next one.
At this point, I'd ask Rob Price, Assistant Superintendent of Operational Services, to join us. He's going to give us an update on some of the food distribution efforts, which have been incredible. Some of our maintenance and custodial teams, and then give the board and the community a bond update. We've had some interesting information transpire that's going to change some of our timelines around bond. And so Rob will get into that and answer any questions you might have. So Rob Price, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Good evening, everyone. As Dr. Anderson reiterated, or I'm going to reiterate, it has been amazing watching our teams come together. Our custodial staff has cleaned and sanitized all of our schools. A lot of that work took place from March 13th through March 20th. And then some of it carried on over spring break. Their focus right now has been on cleaning and disinfecting all of our high touch surfaces, desktops, doorknobs, railings, etc. We really did a top down approach. So we started at the ceilings, cleaned the walls all the way down to the floor. We've been working really closely with food services and community schools and developed specific cleaning protocols for their food distribution and emergency childcare programs. We've also went through and adjusted all of our ventilation schedules to increase air exchanges. And we will have a plan to change out all of our filters in all of our schools as recommended by CDC before students return. So facilities are in a great shape, ready to return. Food services, since mid-March, we've distributed over 71,000 meals to BBSD families. So that's on average about 7,500 meals given out each distribution day, and we distribute on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then 13,500 meals have been donated to community partners just to reduce food waste at the end of each distribution day. So the bags that are being distributed include fresh fruit and vegetables, protein bars, and staples such as rice, pasta, and beans. Some food is purchased while other food is donated through our community food share program. The concept here is to provide food bags to families to make several meals at home so that they only need to visit the food distribution sites twice a week just to minimize the challenges or minimizing exposure to our people. And I don't know if you heard or not, but last week a donor made it possible to donate a ham to each family. We gave out 1,480 hams right before the Easter holiday at no cost to the district. So that was exciting. There were 6 to 8 pound hams. And then this week, food service will be launching an education campaign to provide cooking and nutritional resources to teach people how to use the foods that we're donating them. So I just want to say a tremendous thank you to our board and to Dr. Anderson for making this a priority. If you have been to any of our food distribution sites, you would understand the impact this is having on our families in need. Also want to talk a little bit about the impact that Impact on Education has had. They've recently raised over $250,000 from donors in our community. And then we've submitted 14 grant applications to continue this program and make it a priority. So again, the impact, I have never been involved in something in my career that has been more impactful. And then I want to end lastly, and this is regarding the bond. Over the past week, we determined that due to the challenges with material deliveries and the reduced workforce that we have in the construction industry, that we've made the decision to close 7 of our schools that will be under construction for the remainder of the school year. And this wasn't made, this was a challenging decision, and we've spent a lot of time talking about it. But what we're dealing with right now is the scope of work has not changed, but the amount of people that we can put on a job site has changed. So our workforce is limited by 50% per Governor Polis's recommendation. And then we have limited hours that we can work in within the city of Boulder, city of Broomfield, et cetera. So the scope of work hasn't changed, but our workforce has. And then the chain, the material deliveries that we're going to be encountering, we've been notified in many different circumstances that we're going to be seeing material deliveries, et cetera. So we're trying to plan ahead. If we take over the projects now, we can start getting those materials in soon, staging them on site. So then when we begin the work, we know we have the materials there to complete the projects. So that's the end of the operations update. Any specific questions?
Okay, Richard?
I have a couple of comments, but I'll wait for board communications.
Okay, Kathy?
What are the plans? Do we have plans to continue food distribution through the summer?
Right now, Kathy, we have plans to continue food distribution through the end of the school year. And then we'll continue to look what our options are as we know more about summer school.
Anything else, Kathy?
No, thanks.
Donna?
No.
Kitty?
Yes. Rob, how will reducing the workforce by 50% impact the timeline?
You can't do more with less, Kitty. I guess that's what I would fall back on is, you know, if you think about potentially on a lot of these projects, we have over 100 workers on the job site on a daily basis. And if we're practicing social distancing, we might be able to put 50 people. So that's a lot less work that's accomplished each day. So we have to extend the schedule to make up that additional time for the lost labor.
And is that could that possibly impact whether or not kids and staff can come back to the school in the fall?
No, the whole goal here is, and the reason we have to do that is to make sure these projects are completed by August 1st. So that's why we're needing the additional time. Less manpower gives us more time. We got to make sure we have a smoother landing in August. But that's what we're planning for, is to have everything done by August 1st.
Thanks.
Okay, Lisa? Okay. And Stacy?
Yes, I had a question, and I'm not sure, Rob, you're the right person, but I mentioned this to the other Rob, our superintendent, last week. Is there a way for families to transfer the money they have in their meal plan accounts to assist the effort of the food distribution?
There definitely is, Stacy, and we will be communicating that out to the district in an email that's going out, I believe, this week, and
Great.
letting you know what that process looks like.
Perfect. Thank
That
you.
would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Next up, Rob?
Next, I'd invite Andrew Moore, our Chief Information Officer, to give the board an IT update. Andrew.
All right, great. Thanks, Dr. Anderson, President Marquis, and members of the board. I'm happy to be here tonight and to give you an update on what IT has been doing to ensure our students are connected at home and they're able to learn effectively. First is the distribution of Chromebooks. My team spent 2 weekends basically disassembling all the carts that we have in the schools. That brought to life about 7,000 Chromebooks. They were all cleaned. They were reset, so there were no profiles or anything left on them. And then they were distributed over 2 specific distribution dates set at each school. So the vast majority of Chromebooks went out that way. But we knew that all students did not get Chromebooks through that process that needed them. And so we invented a delivery service, which we are now calling IT Prime. And so we have 2 to 3 of our vans running every day. We've made about 150 deliveries so far. And what we're basically doing is going to the homes where students or staff have broken devices. Through social distancing, we'll pick up the broken device, we'll swap it immediately with a different device, and then we'll take their device back to be repaired back at our central facility. But we're also using IT Prime to deliver hotspots. And that's the other area of IT that we're working really hard at getting every student connected on the internet. I'm happy to say that we have most students who are not connected now connected, and they're connected through 3 different ways. We have a contract with Comcast where the district, in those cases where families cannot afford to pay for the service, the school district is picking up the cost of Internet Essentials, which is Comcast $9.95 a month program. We are also distributing hotspots in those areas where it's not where Comcast doesn't reach, or we've got better coverage with the hotspots. And I'm happy to say that we have a partnership with the city of Boulder. Their library had 100 T-Mobile hotspots that they gave to us for distribution. And their IT department had 25 Verizon hotspots that they had for disaster recovery planning that they also gave to us. And we've distributed those. We also have additional units that we've purchased, and those are being used in the other communities where we need them. And then last is Livewire, where we have good coverage of the Livewire broadband over the air service out in Lafayette. But that vendor is leaned in, and they right now are working with the county and are getting a tower put up on the county jail. And that will allow them to service what we believe will be about 100 students, most of which have hotspots now, but the Livewire service will be much better once that's in place. And then last, I'd like to bring up that our service desk has morphed itself from 6 people answering the phones for principals and teachers primarily to about 12 or 13 people, where we brought in our field techs, and now we're answering the phones for students, for parents, and for teachers who are working remotely. So there's been a little bit of learning, but overall it's gone well, and I couldn't be more proud of my team for everything they're doing to ensure all of our students have an equitable opportunity to learn. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, Richard? No?
Andrew. Hi, Rob. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Just a quick comment, because we have been fielding many phone calls from parents that their children, these are elementary school kids that have Chromebooks, and the kids don't know how to use the Chromebooks, and parents don't know how to use the Chromebooks. There's a lot of frustration in these particular households, so much that they're pulling their hair. Some are crying. I mean, it's some are reaching some emotional depression even. So I'm wondering what could be done to support some of these particular families.
So I've got one comment, and then Rob, I'm sure you'll have something to add as well. A couple things in that we do have some support for Spanish speakers where they can call the service desk. There's a prompt to take you to a Spanish speaker. And so we'll help in those cases where we can. But Ari and his group are also engaged in the community. And so if you're hearing about families that are struggling in this way, I'd encourage you to send Ari and myself a note, and we'll make sure that we're doing everything we can to support those families.
Okay, Kathy?
Oh, can I, Tina, is it
yeah,
okay if
Rob,
I just
sorry.
add, I'm sorry, add a couple of comments? As we enter into this new reality, I think that more important than ever is that we continue to remind our community members, our parents, our kids, to utilize what is a pretty tight chain of command to make sure that that everybody gets the support that they need, right? Starting with the teacher, right? If a child or a parent is struggling with the instruction that a teacher has developed, they should talk to the teacher, have a conversation. If for whatever reason they can't get a hold of the teacher, or in that conversation they feel like they need more support, they should go to their school's principal or assistant principal, administration, counselor, and then those folks can help. And if at that point there still isn't the support they need, they certainly can contact our district staff. They can email me. I'll make sure that they're routed to the right supports. But you know, the trick, you know, the balance that we're really trying to strike as we move to home learning is to try to give teachers, kids, parents the space to make sure that we're meeting everyone's unique and individual needs. And sometimes if you jump all the way to the district office, you know, folks are looking for blanket kind of, you know, decisions or answers that might help some but might not help others. So we're really trying to honor that teacher, kid, principal, school relationship, just like we would if we were in-person learning. So I just wanted to share that with the board and with the community as we're hearing things. Our goal is to make sure that we're driving them back to the folks that are the closest to them that can help them the quickest.
Richard, any other questions?
I'm gonna wait.
Okay. Kathy?
So what are we doing when the school year's over with the Chromebooks that we've deployed? Are we going to collect them back? Are they gone for the duration? What are we doing with the ones that we've sent out to everybody?
That's a great question, Kathy. We are just starting to think about what happens. And I think a lot depends on whether we come back to school, whether we don't. But we're already thinking about how to get them back into the carts, how to make sure they're cleaned again, how you know, they're fully functional.
Thanks.
Any other questions, Kathy? Okay, Donna?
No.
Kitty?
I just want to say thank you. You have all have worked so hard and you've done such a great job. And I've heard good feedback from the community. So thanks for all your hard work.
Thanks, Kitty. I know a number of them are listening in tonight, so they got your message directly, which I appreciate.
Lisa?
Yeah, first, we have 3 kids and 2 adults all Zooming here, so we are also in possession of a Chromebook, and it's working really well. So thanks so much for sorting that out. How many families do we know who want to be connected remotely and aren't?
That's a great question, and one that I can't give you a definitive answer on. We estimated between 600 and 900 right out of the gates, and that was done through surveys. And then we had a process that the schools followed where they directed those families to contact Comcast to see if they can get onto their hotspots or their phones. And so there were a number of families we know were connected through no intervention of us. And then the ones we know about, and those numbers I shared earlier, are the ones that have come to IT, and we're having to do specific student by student work to get them connected. I think when it's all said and done, we will probably help with about 350 students. And then there's probably that many again that were able to find their own connections once we gave them a little bit of direction.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, I would also just like to say thank you for putting all of this together. I've been hearing about One2Web for the 7 years I've been on the board, and I feel like this has been the most rapid launch of massive One2Web across 31,000 students that we probably weren't prepared for, and I'm impressed at how quickly we did it. And I also just wanted to share across, Rob's comments, both Rob's and Andrew's comments, the incredible focus on equity. We know we have gaps, I think, and that we're not reaching everyone, but I haven't been in a conversation that didn't start with, well, who's going to be the most impacted and how are we going to help solve that student's problems? And we probably won't get to 100%, but the extent to which the focus has been on those who are the most at risk and who are going to be most impacted by this event has been phenomenal from my vantage point. So I really appreciate that continued focus that we started with, that this district's always been focused on, but I really appreciate it. Okay, so, and then my other comment was, in high school, I hate to say this, Andrew, but I'm not so sure about Chrome carts anymore. That's just a lot of germs passing through a lot of kids. So I'm just going to throw that out as a comment, not as a recommendation. So.
There will be conversations, I think, with the high schools that haven't gone to One2Web, but I'll leave the decision obviously up to the principals.
Yeah. So anyway, all right. What's Kathy? Yes.
So this might be a question for you, Rob. So a lot of families have 2 and 3 kids trying to all share one Chromebook. So how are we managing that? The teachers, I'm just wondering how that gets managed because it doesn't really work. Lisa made me think of that when if you just have one kid at home, which is all I have, it works pretty well. But when you've got 3 and 4 kids all trying to access things at the same time, what advice are we giving and how are we handling that?
Yeah, so I could take that one as well. We're not limiting the number of devices. So if a family needs 2 or 3 devices because they have 2 or 3 kids, we're able to get them as many devices. The internet connection is a different story, especially if you have mom and dad at home doing work and they may be on their own Zoom calls eating up bandwidth. And so we do work with those families, trying to give them strategies on staggering the work. I know one family where one student is doing their online work in the morning and another one is doing it in the afternoon. We had one family that I think they had 5 children and they were on a hotspot. So we gave them a second hotspot. And so it literally is working case by case and trying to find the most appropriate solution.
Okay, and any other questions? Stacy, did I ask you?
No. And I just have a comment. I read a story today about a school district in Austin that is equipping school buses with Wi-Fi and then placing them in neighborhoods that need it. Just an FYI, I thought that was a really creative way to maybe reach some other neighborhoods instead of giving each individual family a hotspot.
Yeah, no, it's a great solution that's primarily used in rural areas. We're actually looking to acquire a device to put on a bus to test it out. The pros are we can move internet wherever. The cons are you still have to be within about 150 to 250 feet from the bus. So you still have to come to the bus for the most part to be able to get that internet. But Rob Price and I are already talking, and we will test it because you never know if we're going to have hotspot areas with the actual virus where we'll need to deploy in some different way.
Okay, any other questions that came to mind? All right, Kitty.
I just have one question, and this is not really for Andrew, but I'm wondering how it's going with the kids who are doing their work with, papers and pencils and the backpacks we gave out. And how's that working, and how are they getting their assignments back to the teachers?
Kitty, I'll have Robin address that when she comes up to talk
Okay.
about home learning, if that works.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Next, I'd like to invite Mike Grados, our Chief Human Resources Officer, to give an update on all topics HR related. So Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson, President Marcus, members of the board. Good evening. It's an interesting phenomenon that we're in, and this pandemic has really caused some new opportunities for us in HR. But as we're working virtually, we're a lot more productive in that sense because the employees are our biggest interest at this point because they make what the quality of the school district. So you probably have received or should have received the HR guidelines, which I think was in news and notes. And with that is lots and tons of information, all the way from Stephanie's report to the COVID-19, how we're preparing employees to come into work, how we're screening those, and then how we're dealing with employees who feel they have the symptoms and things of that sort. So that has been the challenge. And actually, as we're moving forward here in this week, it's getting easier. The employees are getting much better with understanding what that is. And they're coming forward, and a lot of them really want to work. I mean, even though we're staying home, our essential employees are working, our food service, our childcare, but there are other employees from other units that are asking, hey, can I help over at childcare? Can I help with the food distribution? So I think it's just commendable that our employees are doing that. The other thing you've probably noted, and you probably saw in the paper, I mean, we have, by order of the Governor Polis, we have suspended the evaluations, license evaluations for both principals, teachers, psychologists, SLPs, etc. With that, the only thing is that in BVSD, probationary teachers evaluations are due March 1. So those were completed before the pandemic hit. So we had that information out there already. For the non-probationary teachers, we now are actually going to continue those next fall. So many of the principals have probably had a mid-year review with their teachers and their staff about where they are in the evaluation cycle, and they'll continue that next fall. You'll also notice that I think a couple of months ago, we probably presented to you around the student growth measures that we're going to try to implement for next year. We're still on track with that, except we're going to change and make it a little more simpler with the student growth measures around the framework. You saw the framework, you saw the pie, you saw the 12.5% for collective, 12.5% for individual. We're probably going to make most of that individual because we won't have any CMAS testing. But we will look at CMAS in the past and maybe do a 3-year average or something like that and weight that very, very low. So we're meeting with our 1338 committee with the BVA Association to continue that process and move forward with that. But it'll be a lot more simpler than we've planned because now we have less to measure on. Other things is that we're also trying with our employees to keep them whole. We're trying to keep them active, working. There are some that probably aren't working a full day, but we're still paying. But I mean, they're doing other things. They're either doing it, our paraprofessionals are working online with their teachers. Our special ed pairs are doing the same. There's being some professional development videos that we're offering our employees. Our custodians are active. And again, our bus drivers are really volunteering up and coming up and doing things. Our maintenance is still working. And so our HR staff is staying busy. We're still posting jobs. We're changing start dates until we know what we're going to be up against later, or not we're going to be up against, but what we're going to be doing. And we're going to be doing virtual interviews. So we look forward to still working with that. And we know that we'll still have more challenges, but we're going to be as transparent and as honest and helpful to our employees. The last thing I would say is that the negotiations that we've had this year with our office professionals, our classified and our paraprofessionals have been suspended as well. We don't know what the financial outlook will look like. So we're trying to be as transparent with them as well and holding that off until we know more. So with that, are there any questions?
Okay, Richard.
No.
Okay. Kathy?
So to make these changes, do we need to change anything in any of our policies? I don't think we need to, from my understanding, that we don't need to do anything legislatively to do these changes, but will we be looking at policy changes to be able to implement what we're doing now and what we need to do going forward, since we won't have measures of student learning?
Mm-hmm. We'll probably have to suspend what our policies are right now, so that as we move into next year, we'll probably be meeting with BBEA and of course, with you guys in terms of what our policies look like, and then maybe suspending those. Maybe it's a temporary thing. But I think that most districts that I've talked to, I think they're going as they're still using their policies, knowing that there's a suspension of the evaluation system. But
So
I think it would be good to do
nothing
that.
immediate, Mike, something down the road, we'll have to look at some policy, either temporarily waiving them or whatnot.
That's true.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Donna?
So a question, and I already sent this to Rob because I've had calls concerning this, just because my area of expertise was always with the IEPs. In order to meet the IEP hours, especially on the intensive kiddos, will we need to go into summer and hire additional help or extend the contract for to meet those hours needed on the IEP?
Donna, that's a good question. I can't give you a definitive answer because I don't know what the future holds in terms of whether we're coming back or not. But I do believe that we'll probably have to do some modifications and actually maybe some extended contracts to do that, but don't know that for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Kitty?
My dog is driving me crazy. First of all, I'm really glad to hear that we're paying people still, even the hourly employees. So that's really good. Isn't it, Maisie? She's biting me. Do we know, is anybody infected that we know of on staff?
I can't answer that. We've had some employees who've gotten sick, yes. And we followed the protocols that we needed to follow under the health department's guidance. So it's inevitable that it's going to happen.
Okay, is anybody that we're worried about?
We're worried about all of them.
Well, I mean, sick enough that you know what I mean.
Not at this point, no.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yes.
Okay. Lisa? Okay. And Stacy? All right. Thank you so much. Let's keep going.
Very good. Thanks, Mike. I'd ask Robin Fernandez, our Assistant Superintendent of the East Support Network, to talk, to invite her to come into the conversation, talk about home learning. And I believe that she's going to touch a little bit, Donna, on the question that you had asked around serving our students with special needs. So Robin, take it away.
Good evening, President Marquis, members of the board, Dr. Anderson. As you know, we are in our third week of home learning. And I would like to take a couple of moments to highlight a core part of our home learning plan. That is our engagement process. It's designed to ensure that we are addressing those individual barriers that we've been touching on this evening that students and families may currently be experiencing. Of course, our goal is to provide continuity of learning for our students. And therefore, what we know that we need to do as a district is to reduce the factors that may be getting in the way of achieving that. So our engagement flow chart, which was created by our newly created engagement team, has 5 phases. Those phases are connect, communicate, identify barriers, get support, and escalate if necessary. So phases 1 and 2, which are connect and communicate, occur at the school level. Teachers and other staff make attempts to contact students and families who haven't been in contact or who haven't been in consistent contact with teachers. If their attempts to contact students and families aren't successful, then counselors, community liaisons, and principals step in to make additional attempts until the family has been reached. Once contact has been made, phase 3 kicks in, which involves identifying whatever barrier that exists to students being able to access home learning. So are they not engaging or not able to engage because of illness? Is it access to technology? Is it technical difficulties, communication, a language barrier? So we do have a lot of school-based staff, as Dr. Anderson referred to, but there's also a lot of network staff that are reaching out to families, both in English and Spanish, but are also standing ready to support families when contacted, to work with individual students and families to help them navigate the home learning plan, navigate their technology, help facilitate communication with school staff, whatever is necessary. We have a lot of support staff whose previous duties are suspended at the moment, and therefore they are able to take on additional roles, working very, very closely with individual students and families. So the fewer and fewer families that are not connected to internet are in touch with teachers via telephone, FaceTime, photo exchange of work that's being completed at home, and then teachers give them feedback on that work. So as more families are able to connect via Chromebook, thanks to the tireless work of the IT department, we've been able to phase out much of the need for paper and pen and the old-fashioned conversations via telephone with students. But teachers will continue to do that with individual students as long as necessary. When we work to remove those barriers and students still are not able to engage, we then tap into our attendance advocates at the elementary or middle level, or the engagement specialists at high school. And many of these people already have relationships with students and families and know much about individual student circumstances or family circumstances and are able to address those needs as well. As a very, very last resort, if we are not able to make any contact at all with a student and family, we would call for a welfare check or make a social services call, because ultimately the bottom line is we want to make sure that all of our students and families are safe. I do want to mention that we are dedicated, of course, to continuing special education services for students on IEPs. All special education staff are providing both direct and indirect services that align as best as possible to IEP goals. So the staff uses IEP service minutes as a guide. And this interaction with students can include daily or weekly meetings. It can include virtual direct or small group lessons, individual check-in meetings on individual work tasks, and very specific guidance has gone to each one of our special education staff to know how to best utilize their services to support students in this environment. Special education staff also have time to meet with general ed staff to consult around IEP accommodations and minutes if needed, and to help them access whole class general education instruction. Students should be accessing their general education home learning courses with the accommodations as appropriate and as needed. So to date, we've had really great success in our attempts to make contact with nearly all students in BVSD, and of course, to support those with distinct or individual needs. We're proud of our efforts to focus on the removal of barriers as a cornerstone for our approach to home learning, to make sure that we are working as we always do to meet the needs of every student in BVSD. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Okay, Richard.
Thanks, Robin. And I do want to thank all the effort that BVSD has made to assure some sense of equity as it relates to some of our families that are having difficulty technology-wise, as well as their children not being able to manipulate the Chromebooks that they have received. So thank you, BVSD, for that. I think we've been doing a great job in regards to that, but there are some isolated incidences. Families that, and we do, by the way, we do advise them to go ahead and follow the chain of command that Rob mentioned earlier. There's a lot of, not a lot, but there are some instances where they can't get a hold of the teacher when they need to get a hold of the teacher. And sometimes when something happens, they need support like then. And when they can't get that support, then that's when the frustration happens for many of the families. And I'm wondering if through the work that El Paso is doing, if we can identify those families and then provide the names to, with their permission, obviously, to you, Robin, if that would be helpful.
Yes, I would be more than happy to be the recipient of those names, because we are working hard to make sure that any family that needs help has it. And I do also want to mention that there is a tech support person assigned to every building, many of whom have the ability to communicate with families in Spanish. And so we have a lot of staff standing by who are wanting to help. So all we need to do is make those connections. So yes, please feel free to reach out to me with that information.
Thank you. And on the paper and pencil stuff, and those are the backpacks that were provided by Impact in Education, correct? Yeah, those are very, very helpful. But sometimes without a whole lot of guidance, they're just paper and pencil stuff. So can we also refer some of these families that are having some difficulty with the backpacks to you or to whomever?
Sure, of course. And also Ari and his team are available through the family hotline to answer questions. And also teachers are working with students who may have these backpacks and are doing work through a traditional pen and pencil format, but that doesn't mean that those teachers shouldn't be in constant contact with those students. So if anyone is struggling with that and not getting ongoing feedback from a teacher, we're more than happy to facilitate that communication.
Thank you.
Okay, Kathy?
So thanks, Robin. It's really encouraging to hear all of the great work that's going on. When I talk to other school boards and administrators around outside of Boulder, what I'm hearing is that office hours oftentimes are being used more to support the parents than even the kids, because parents are going through their own trauma. I'm wondering if that's your experience. I think that it's really hard, and I'm just wondering, what you said something about a family hotline. What are we doing to be able to support some of the parents as they struggle through balancing, being at home with 3 kids and working and all of that?
That's a great question. We are so proud of our families, because teachers, students, families, people have remained overwhelmingly positive and dedicated to the need of students, despite the tough times that families are having to try to balance working from home and supporting students. So it is true, and primarily in the younger grades, that the role that the parents often have is to help facilitate that access to learning. Older students, secondary students, in many ways, and very often, are able to facilitate that learning themselves. And they are much more used to accessing content in a digital format. But some parents, especially as they are getting used to it, we are seeing that with each passing day, parents are getting the hang of it and kids are getting the hang of it, because we knew that there was going to be a period of time that they were getting used to this new format and a new structure, a new routine. And part of what we're doing in suggesting an asynchronous opportunity for parents and families to access learning hopefully provides additional flexibility for parents who need to work from home and families who don't quite have their new schedule for their new normal down yet. And so we have been supporting parents because we know that this is a new definition of parents supporting homework. And parents are now supporting and facilitating home learning. And we are happy to do that, as Andrew Moore suggested, both through the IT helpline, but also with our school staffs who are helping parents understand how to facilitate in this new environment. So happy to do it, but less and less needed every day.
Great to hear that. Then I have a quick question. Maybe it'll be answered later. We got some emails in advance of the meeting about the grading systems that we're using. So I was wondering if you could just touch on that a little bit.
Sure. And also, I want to make sure that we do mention that the family helpline, because I have it right here in front of me now, that the number is 720-770-0102. And I'll just mention that for any family that may be watching that would like that type of support. So grading. So at the elementary level, standards-based grading in terms of reporting out on students' progress toward mastery of the standards is as it has been previously. At middle level, they have gone to a pass-fail format. And at high school, they are working within the parameters of our traditional grading system with a few modifications. Because what we know is that we do not want student grades to be negatively influenced by whatever individual information or individual situation may be occurring with students or families. And so we do not want lack of access to technology, or as we were talking about before, siblings who may need to be sharing one device, or older siblings who may be caring for younger siblings, or whatever it is that may be occurring in a student's and family's life to end up being a penalty that is reflected in their grade. So therefore, we will not be issuing Fs to students without a very thorough review on a case-by-case basis, having fully exhausted our engagement process, but also support with teachers, counselors, and leadership. And we've also talked about how student grades cannot go down, they can go up, but not go down, unless we have also fully exhausted our engagement process. We are happy that we are have the ability to couple the home learning plan with the engagement process, because both of those are the academic support, but also the social emotional support, the community liaison, and the outreach support that students may need. And so we will be looking at that with the flexibility needed to not use grades as a punishment or a reflection of the equity or lack of equity that may be a factor in the student's learning currently.
Thanks.
Donna? Good?
I just want to say thanks again. I thanked Andrew. I want to thank you and your team and all of the folks who are doing such a good job to get the kids learning and to support them with what they need. So thank you.
And Donna, do you have anything?
No, I forgot to unmute. No, I was just going to say the same thing Kitty did. Good. Thank you for the information. Thank you for the hard work.
Lisa? And Stacy?
Yeah, Robin, could you elaborate a little bit more about the grade that can't go down but only up? And is that in the high schools? And if so, are all high schools subscribing to that? Because I've heard a lot of mixed messages, a lot of confused students, and So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure, I would be happy to. So yes, that is in all high schools. All high schools have adopted the same approach to grading. And that is because, again, that we don't want, especially in these initial stages of getting accustomed to accessing content, instruction and learning in a different way, we don't want students' grades to go down because of an engagement or an access issue. So what we have said is that we will address issues of lack of engagement or lack of work completion or lack of understanding progress toward mastery of content on an individual basis, both with the teacher, but also with the principal and also with the engagement specialists. That again include our engagement specialists, our attendance advocates, our counselors, our mental health team. So teachers and principals have flexibility, but they also have the ability to help support students through this time without having grades immediately reflect any of those barriers.
And in high schools, would that be their grade on March 12th, or is it their second progress report? What is the baseline that's being used?
Yes, it's the grade that they had in place on the last day of in-person learning.
That was March 12th. Okay. And okay, if parents or students have questions about that, who should they go to? Their principal, their teacher? There's just a lot of misinformation out there. I was wondering if there's going to be a communique about this to everyone. Even within a school, students are getting mixed messages from different teachers within the same school. So I'm wondering if there's some kind of communication that might go out.
Sure, that's a great question, and we appreciate the feedback. So we can definitely work with Randy on additional information. But in the meantime, people should feel free to reach out to their school principals, and if necessary, the area superintendents or area executive directors are also happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Robin.
Okay. Anyone needed to ask an extra question that they thought of in the interim? Okay, Rob?
Thanks, Tina. At this point, thank you, Robin. At this point, I'd invite Bill Sutter, our Chief Financial Officer, to give us a bit of an update on this year's budget, the 19-20 budget, some of the impacts that COVID-19 has had on that, with the understanding that he will also be presenting on the 2021 budget as we get onto the agenda. But right now, he's just going to be speaking to the 19-20 budget.
Thanks, Rob. So just a few items to touch on and think about as we move through these last few weeks of school and what has occurred over the last month or so. So there's different components to the financial impact to us. Certainly loss of revenue is one of them. And it's kind of targeted in some specific areas. Refunds that we've provided to families around tuition for our preschool and childcare programs, student fees that have been paid, not all student fees, but some student fees, and then certainly revenue collections for things like food services, since we're not serving lunch all across the district to all students as we normally would. So that revenue side is one piece of it. We're not seeing or expecting significant impacts to sort of the lion's share of our revenue from property tax collections, although there have been some conversations around and authority granted by the governor to have the county treasurers waive interest and penalties fees for late payments of property taxes. That's not really expected to be a significant impact to us. Most property taxes are paid through some sort of escrow mortgages, whether it's commercial side of things, non-residential or residential. On the expenditure side, we're certainly, since most of our expenditures are tied up in salaries and benefits, and we are continuing to pay staff their regular wages, those expenses are just happening as we would normally have expected them to. There is some additional pay that's been authorized for those staff that are in those more higher risk kind of functions, those childcare centers, the food service distribution, the warehouse workers that are working with food services. So there's an additional stipend that's being paid to those folks. Certainly the extra costs around the food distribution, while we're getting some donations for that, we are purchasing some of that food. Some of the costs, the internet access that Andrew mentioned, materials for home learning, those things that we printed up, all the backpacks that were donated. We did buy some additional materials and books to be handed out. I would say by and large, that's not a astronomical number for those additional expenses. We're working on quantifying all of that, and certainly as we continue those expenditures, additional expenditures will continue to pile up. I would say if we extend the year for some group of students as needed into the summer, that's where some really significant additional expenses could pile up if we are paying staff for an extended contract, daily rates on professional staff, things like that. So we won't know that for a while until we get closer to decision-making points on that. There are some savings, obviously, that we're experiencing. Utilities, schools have been put on the unoccupied mode we have central controls for those utilities. So there's been some savings there. Certainly we're not driving our buses, so bus fuel, field trips and athletics, some savings around that. Additional pay, so while we are paying staff their regular wages, if there was additional pay for some sort of activities, stipends, certainly subs, we're not seeing some of those expenditures that we would normally have seen. This is a very ballpark estimate, but I'm guessing it'll be kind of around the $1 million ballpark from loss of revenue and extra expenditures that we'll see as a result of this. Again, not a astronomical number that's going to significantly impact us, but certainly something we'll keep an eye on as we go forward. And then the savings will help offset some of that. We close the books on the month of March tomorrow. So we will go into our process for the third quarter financials that we would normally do. And we're going to do a thorough, similar to what we do in the mid-year analysis that we reviewed back in February. We'll do a third quarter analysis, both on the general fund and the other funds that are more significantly impacted: preschool, community schools, food services, transportation, and kind of dig into what the impacts are looking like to where we'll end the year this year, and or any additional savings overall that we might see. So I would say that we will have additional financial impacts, both loss of revenue and expenses from this, not astronomical, and the savings that we're going to see won't be enough to offset all of it, I don't believe. So with that, any questions?
Okay, Richard.
No questions.
Kathy?
So Bill, I had on my calendar yesterday, we were going to do interviews for auditors. Where's the process for that? Did it on hold, or we'll be doing virtual interviews? Kind of where is that process?
Yes, we decided, and it's within the large resolution that's included for tonight, to essentially cancel that RFP and have the board authorize extension, a 1-year extension to our current auditors. Just feeling that it was important to be able to have a really solid process if we're going to go into a 5-year contract for our auditors. The process of virtual interviews and things like that just wouldn't be quite the same. We're definitely impacted at the district office with the bond work that's going on. And so just transitioning that this year would be a more of an impact than I think would be worth trying to push for having new auditors, or might be the same auditors, but just making sure that it's a real fair and transparent process, the RFP process for those auditors.
And I've been hearing some discussion about needing to shorten up the timeline for between when we finally know what the state budget's going to look like and what our budget's going to look like, and the timeline for getting that presented to the public and to the board and passing it. Have you heard anything more about that? I think we're supposed to have 30 days and they need to shorten it to 2 weeks or something. Have you heard about that?
So I'll go into that in depth in the preliminary budget process.
All right, thanks.
Donna? Kitty? Lisa? Stacy? And I just had a quick question, also in the same resolution that has the extension of the search for auditors. It also references that the board is going to approve purchases made with relation to the coronavirus. Are these the same costs that you're talking about, the expenses, the backpacks and food services that we're talking about?
Yes, and certainly there could be something else that comes along that's unforeseen at this moment. And these, up to this point, these have been relatively small purchases and would have been under any sort of limit that would have gone to the board. You know, that $100,000 threshold. But I think it's just a matter of making sure if we do have something we have to react to, that we are able to do it quickly. We don't have days sometimes to make a decision, let alone weeks. And so that's really the purpose behind that change.
Okay, but and I think now we've changed the language so that you would let us know in 30 days or something like that. Is that correct? Okay. All right. I think, Rob, what's next?
I just wanted to end my comments with just 2 more points. I wanted to speak to the class of 2020. Not that any of our seniors, they may or may not be watching. I'd be surprised if they are, but their parents might be watching. And I need for our community to know and understand that I understand how important the senior activities are and they mean to our kids. I will tell you, we have a meeting tomorrow with students and parents to talk about ways that as a district, we can collectively celebrate the class of 2020. We're continuing to look at how we might be able to do in-person ceremonies. My preference certainly would be to do an in-person ceremony in some way, shape, or form this summer versus a virtual ceremony. So we're continuing to work on this. I just wanted to reiterate how important it is personally to me to make sure that the class of 2020 knows that we're doing everything we can to try to make sure that you're honored and that we celebrate you. And I would just say lastly, the last piece that we're working on, board members, and we'll be able to publish this hopefully soon, is what do we do when we come back, right? I think that we had this conversation with our district accountability committee. Earlier on in the week, I'll have the same conversation with our district parent council tomorrow. What are the protocols that we're going to put in place when we come back to measure the impacts that COVID-19 has had on student learning, understand where the gaps are in learning, and how do we then make sure that we have extended learning opportunities to fill those gaps and make sure that kids are back on track. And so I'd want the community and the board to know that we've been doing a lot of thinking over the past several weeks on what a process and system could look like. and that we'll be ready to publish that, I would say, hopefully within the next week or so. So just I wanted to make sure that that the board and the community know that that's something that's important to us, and we're working on that. And that would end my superintendent's comments.
Okay, and board members, any further questions? You can just raise a hand. I think I can see the hand raises pretty well, the physical ones. Any other thing? Okay, then with that, we'll move on. Does anyone need a break? Is everyone okay? Kitty? You need to unmute.
I could, yes, I was trying to do that. I could use a little break.
Okay, so let's take a 7-minute break, something like that.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, we'll be back. Okay, I think we're ready to get back to our meeting. We did something pretty different to accommodate the format of this meeting. We asked that people send their comments via email for this particular meeting with the word public comment in the subject line. Those emails will be then posted in our minutes when they're published so that people can have access to what the public had wanted to share with us this evening. We are looking actively into ways to have a live public participation for possibly the next meeting that has more budget information. And we're thankful for the Boulder City Council that passed along some best practices from different city councils in our region. So that should be helpful as we try to navigate this and have a better experience for public participation. It's very important to all of our board members. So we did get all of the emails and we had a chance to read them. And we'll go straight into board communication, at which point you can address emails if you wish, or as usual, share any comments you have. So if it's okay, I'd like to go in the same alphabetical order and start with Richard. Is that okay, Richard?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I did read all the emails, and I do want to thank all those individuals that sent emails concerning their different concerns. I do have a question, because it seemed to me like there were a lot of, not a lot, but there were some emails that were asking about when are we really going to make a decision on, are the schools going to be closed for the remainder of the school year or not? And I know, Rob, that we're following the governor's and the health department's guidance on all of this, but and we also know, because I think a lot of parents are asking those questions because they do know of some of the school districts around the Denver metro area that have already announced school closures for the remainder of the year. So do we have any more information on that, or any more feedback on that?
Sure, I do. And I will tell you that, and as the board could imagine, I've gotten, I would say, a significant amount of emails on both sides of this topic, those that think that we should just go ahead and call it, and those also that are thankful that we're waiting until we have all the information to make the decision. We'll be making a decision by next week. The governor, in his comments and direction on a phone call that we had with him, I would say about a week ago, stated that by the week of the 20th that he would be making a decision. And so that's the plan at this point, unless there's other information that's presented to us that would make us move faster than that. At this point, I haven't seen that. I am in constant contact with Boulder County Public Health. I have, so the public will know and understand that I'm on weekly calls with our local municipalities and our governmental agencies, making sure that we have the most up-to-date information, so we'll be well informed when we make that decision. And so that's maybe a long answer to your question, Richard, but the public can anticipate at the very latest a decision for all schools to be made by next week.
Thank you very much, Rob. Another question that I have relating to the information that was presented as it relates to those 7, I don't know if they're all elementary schools or not, that will stay closed for the remainder of the year. They'll still be doing the home learning, I suppose, or are these particular kids going to be farmed into other schools, or what's the story on that?
No, they'll continue. They'll continue with home learning, you know, we looked at this very much as we looked at situations that we've had since I've been superintendent, where we had to Lafayette Elementary last year, where we thought we did an early closure. Eisenhower Elementary the year prior, where we did actually had them come back later. You know, the scope of the work for our bond projects is pretty ambitious, and so we've had to on occasion have to adjust some of the things that we've done to make sure that we accommodate that. And so we viewed this in that same vein. Those students will continue with home learning, and if something monumental were change, I doubt that's going to happen. And we were able to either bring in small groups of students for remediation, intervention, celebration. We would make sure we're working with those schools impacted by this to not take that opportunity away from them. But at this point, we wanted to be really clear in regards to communication that for those 7 sites, that we would be that in-person learning would be closed. We need to get teachers in there to start to gather their personal belongings. And we're actually a couple of weeks out. There's some things that we have to do in the building that made us make that call at this point.
Thanks again, Rob. And I do want to make sure that every individual in Boulder Valley School District be congratulated and appreciated for all of their hard work as it relates to this new phenomena, I guess, regarding home learning. And I just want to make sure that staff hear me saying that I do appreciate the work that they've done. But I also would be remiss if I did not bring situations that I know about in relation to some of the Latino families. And one of the things that we need to realize is that I would say 75% of some of the families that we work with are undocumented. These particular families are losing their jobs. They work in industries that do not pay unemployment benefits. And even if they did, they would not be able to qualify for any of these governmental benefits. Many of them are not going to be able to benefit from any of the support that's coming from the federal departments. And they have many issues. And one of the things that we're trying to make sure that we do through some of the work that we do and some of the work that some of the nonprofits are doing is to make sure that they have their basic needs met. Because if they don't have their basic needs met, you know, we all know about Maslow's theory of hierarchy, that if they don't have their basic needs met, they're not going to focus on any of the other stuff. You know, they just need to make sure that those needs are met. Then maybe they can start focusing on the academics and everything else that they need to focus on. So, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring these particular things up to the board and to you all so that we could at least understand that there are many families out there that aren't like us, you know, that have much more heavy duty challenges than we can even think of. So thank you again. And thank you, BVSD, for all the really great efforts that we've been making.
Okay, Kathy.
I just want to echo what Richard said. My heartfelt thanks to you, Rob, and to staff and to teachers and to bus drivers and to everybody across the district for stepping up. I like your analogy, which is going from our heels to our toes. And I think we're going to be on our toes for a while. But thank you, everybody, for all of the hard work that you're doing. A couple things. One, just for the board. I don't know if the board knows that every Wednesday, CASB's been having webinars on topical issues around the coronavirus, and tomorrow's one on graduation, which is one we've kind of talked about in connection with CDE. So if you need additional information about that, let me know. It's also kind of the clearinghouse for what's been happening nationally through NSBA. So I'm happy to try to connect you with some of those resources because I think it's helpful to know what's going on around the state as well as just in Boulder. A shout out to Impact. We've already done that once, but I didn't get a chance to say that. We all got to do our little videos, which I can tell you took me several tries to get it right. But thanks to Impact for all the great work they're doing. And we have a long way to go, but I really appreciate them standing up for our families and for our community. So I appreciate that. And then I just have one brief thing. I mean, business is still trying to go on a little bit as usual. And so the local accountability system stakeholder group met for the first time yesterday virtually. It consists of parents, a high school teacher representing BVEA, a high school student, me, the superintendent, Rob, and district administrators with responsibilities around strategic plan work and equity, instruction and program evaluation. We reviewed the district proposed metrics and district accountability committee's recent recommendations about metrics. The group came to a consensus on 2 kinds of opportunity metrics that we will ask CU Boulder's Center for Assessment, Design, Research, and Evaluation to study on our behalf. Access to increased learning time for students performing below grade level expectations, and an opportunity to learn metrics around perceptions of school climate in terms of students relating to and feeling supported by educators. Next steps for the group will be to consider the completeness of the list of proposed metrics and to hear back from CU cadre before making recommendations to the board. So it's good work. It feels kind of like, how do we keep doing the good work of the district while recognizing that when we come back in the fall, it's not going to be the same for anybody, even if we come back under the best of circumstances. Richard, thank you for kind of highlighting the unequal and inequitable impacts that this is having across our community. And I think we're only starting to see and feel the impact of that. I think everywhere you turn, you're seeing the unintended and intended consequences of what we're going through. And so I appreciate us all sticking together, and I appreciate you bringing that up. And thank you, Rob, for leading us through this, and Tina for leading us through this, and look forward to continuing to work together. Thanks.
Hey, Donna.
Okay, unmuted. I also thank Richard and Kathy for all of the kudos to everyone, and also talking about the impact it's having on so many that's not equal. I read all the emails. I kind of divided them up into categories. There's emails on staff retention, especially specific personnel mentioned. There's both concerns and compliments. So I think they were equal. We have lots of compliments and lots of concerns regarding the online learning. There were questions regarding reopening, when, how, who, and questions on budget and what it's going to look like. And I appreciate the staff that we have. I feel like one of our major contributions in this administration for the school district was in hiring Rob, and I think he's led us, and I really trust the decisions he's having to make are difficult, and he's got a team set up to do this. And I just want to thank him and the team for working diligently to solve these issues in the best practical ways. And I want to say also, I know it's got to be difficult for those graduating this year, the 2020 graduates. I keep thinking, how can we honor them and give them the recognition that they've worked so hard 12 years for? I know CU has the same issues as well as many other universities. I have a son graduating from CU in this semester, and it's kind of hard on him as well. So I see it from all angles, and I just trust that our staff is doing a great job, and I'm glad that we have you guys leading the ship. Thanks.
Hey, Kitty.
Okay, oops, hang on. Yes, I want to thank Richard for your speaking out for our Latino families. I want to reiterate the thanks everyone else has made. I am so proud of this district and how hard everyone has worked to make the learning continue to go on, to overcome some of the obstacles that are in the way, and really, go the extra mile for getting internet for people. I think we've just done a great job, and kudos to everybody, because I know it has to be hard. It has to be stressful, all of the things that we're doing. A couple of things on public comment. I want to thank everybody who contacted us. I did, obviously read all the emails, but a couple of things I want to mention. I want to thank Christy Westnedge, who was one of the people who wrote us to thank us, which is wonderful. We like hearing that, but also to mention that she is the daughter of a former BBSD school board member, Sally Kingdom, who served about 25 years ago. And also Sarah King. She has spoken to us before about menstrual products. And I really would like to see us do something about this. I don't think having it in the nurse's office is good enough. It takes time away from the students, learning and all of that. So I hope we take a look at that. And then one other thing I wanted to say was, sometimes we get emails and then somebody will email again and say, well, I heard from one board member, why isn't anybody else answering my emails? And so I want to tell you why I don't answer emails. If every email sent to us got 7 different answers, I think it could be really confusing for the person and wouldn't know what to think about that. The other thing is that as board members, we don't have the authority to speak on behalf of the board. So we can't email somebody and say, yes, the board will do this, unless we already know that we're planning to do it. I do answer any email that's sent specifically to me. And I answer emails from people that I know, even if they're sent to everybody. So I hope that clarifies for some people their concerns.
Okay, is that it, Kitty? Oh, I just froze a little bit. Lisa?
Yeah, first, thanks, Kitty, for bringing up Sarah King's email. I want to echo how worthwhile that email is and how important I think it is to address the needs of our students to make sure they have the things they need when they go to the bathroom. After that, I would say I've been really impressed in the last few weeks with the flexibility and innovation that I've experienced personally and that I've heard about anecdotally, that I know, particularly for those of us who have 2 working parents and multiple kids at home, that it's a bit of a circus. And teachers have really been going out of their way to find new and additional ways to make these things work. Principals have been finding new solutions to issues that are popping up, and watching everybody just continue to work together closely and to find ways to come together and to surmount these obstacles has been really inspiring, and I'm really thankful for it.
Okay, Stacy?
Yes, thank you. I also want to reiterate what everyone has said and give their thanks to everyone for going the extra mile. I have a neighbor friend who is a elementary teacher, and she said she's never worked so hard as she has these past couple of weeks. And that wasn't a complaint. It was just that this is really challenging, and everyone has really stepped up to the plate. One thing I do want to acknowledge that we haven't talked about very much is that our faculty and staff also have kids at home, some of them. So they're teaching their classes and they're also guiding their kids. So it's a really challenging time for everybody. And I think we need to acknowledge that so many of them are doing double, triple duty, just like many others, that they have to be a teacher to their students and also to helping their kids get through this as well.
Okay, yeah, Stacy, thanks for bringing that up. I know a lot of teachers who are also teaching 25 kids in their class and also their own children, and it is a unique challenge. Yeah, I think it's just been, and first of the people who emailed, thank you so much for contacting. I'm so glad that you're able to figure out how to do the public comment in this virtual manner, but hopefully we'll have a better alternative. And I also would like to talk about the availability of menstrual products in our bathrooms. It's something that it's been mentioned to us multiple times in other districts and states. I think the state of Illinois has already implemented that across all of its public schools. The other piece is we've talked a lot about how great our staff is and Rob's leadership skills, but I wanted to focus on the amount of partnerships and partnering that is happening with our agencies, with our nonprofits, with different groups. I think it's been incredible, and it's something that I think it might be too soon to say that there are opportunities emerging, but we have a focus in our strategic plan on partnerships. And I feel like we've accelerated some of those in a way that maybe we couldn't have foreseen. a few months ago. So it's been pretty impressive to see all the coordination between so many different people and so much of it focused on equity. I think that there's a lot of work, as I said before, on equity, but there's also a lot of honesty about the gaps that are there and that it might be increasing and how much work we're going to have to do to further decrease the gaps that were already there. So that's all I have. And then we can move on to our next item, which is an information item. We only have one information item, and that is our legislative update. So I'll just mention one thing is that the Vision 2020 effort is still moving forward. And this is the effort that suggests that we create a tax to pay for or add revenue to the education fund. And I'm not sure how that's going to work. So I'm like with many things, it's pretty uncertain and I don't quite know what's going on. So I'm following it and trying to understand what their strategy will be in this environment. Does anyone else have anything to add, Kathy? Kathy, yeah.
Well, I can add a little to that, Tina. It's right now it's called Initiative 271. And obviously what they're trying to do is get people to commit to carry petitions, assuming that at some point in the summer we'll be able to carry petitions. I think that that's going to be a challenge, as we've seen for several of the initiated measures that are kind of in holding patterns right now. They'll have to gather the signatures since it's a constitutional amendment. They're going to need to get, it's a high bar to get it passed in November. I think part of their selling point is going to be that for 80 to 90% of the people, it's a small tax cut. And then it's, but it still starts with the table language, shall taxes be raised by $2 billion, which I think I agree with you is going to be a heavy lift. So stay tuned for more of that to see if they get the signatures. And look, I'm happy to keep you updated as we go forward. And I think we've all gotten the emails from Tanya and Ernestine. The legislature is probably not going back till the middle of May, which makes some sense. And they'll only look at COVID-19 related legislation, which also makes sense to me, I think. So they've got a heavy lift in front of them. And I'll look forward to continuing to hear back and to try to support our legislators as much as we can.
Any other comments about legislative issues? Okay, with that, we can move on to our action items and our consent grouping. I will read them off. 7.1 personnel items, 7.2 approval of minutes, March 10th, 2020 regular meeting. 7.3 approval of minutes, March 10th, 2020 special meeting. 7.4 acceptance of donation, Casey Middle School. 7.5 amendment to the construction manager general contractor contract for bond funded improvement work at Sombrero Marsh. 7.6 amendment to the construction manager general contractor contract for bond funded improvement work at University Hill Elementary. 7.7 approval of the construction manager general contractor contract and an amendment to the CMGC contract for bond funded capital improvement work at Flatirons Elementary School. 7.8 approval of construction manager general contractor contract for bond funded capital improvement work at Crespi Elementary School and amendment. 7.9 closeout to the construction manager general contractor contract for bond funded work at the Mesa Elementary School. 7.10 Connect Me Livewire agreement narrowing the digital divide. 7.11 construction contract for insurance funded roofing repairs at Angevine Middle School, Centaurus High School, Fireside Elementary School, Monarch High School, Monarch K through 8, Pioneer Elementary School, and Sanchez Elementary School. 7.12 Resolution 2012 Extension of Horizons Charter School Contract. 7.13 Resolution 2013 in support of granting additional right-of-way for campus drive improvements. 7.14 Resolution 2014 non-renewal of contracts. 7.15 Resolution 2015 addressing COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, would anyone like to pull an item? Okie doke. With that, do we have a motion to approve? By Kathy, second by Richard. Any questions or comments about what's on the consent agenda, Kitty?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions and a comment. Under personnel, I noticed that there is a woman who resigned from a job and was hired for the exact same job on the same date. And I was just wondering what's up with that. It was working in community schools in the childcare. So anyway, that seemed odd to me. I also just want to say how pleased I am that we're finally doing something about the roads around Monarch. And I guess we had to wait till a developer came in to do it. But the town of Superior is also going to be widening 88th Street there. So at least on the Superior side, that will get better too. So that's all I had.
Okay, and maybe Rob, you can just circle back with Kitty about the question on the personnel.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we'll circle back to you on that.
We
don't
can
need,
do
we
that,
won't
yes.
answer that right now, Mike. We'll just circle back.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Okay, and just, I don't know if to the COVID-19 pandemic resolution, because we had somewhat loose language about what we were affirming and approving in terms of expenses. So I was just looking to make sure that there's a little bit more clarity around that, and also making sure that we were in alignment with policy DJ and the looping in this director of purchasing were the two concerns I had that were addressed. So thank you, Kathleen, for making that clarification. Okay, with that, Laura, would you please call the roll?
Garcia,
Yes.
Gephardt,
Yes.
Marquis,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Sargent,
Yes.
Sweeney Moran,
Yes.
Zis.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so it must be 8 o'clock. I think there's howling in my neighborhood. All right, I think we're at number 9, study items. So 9.1 is 2020-21 preliminary budget update. Bill?
Yes. Just bringing up the. Hopefully that's showing all right for everybody.
Looks good.
All right. So we have the preliminary budget for 2020-2021 school year. So this is the time in the process where we bring forward sort of what we know at this point in time. There's certainly lots of information I'll be going through. These are the sort of agenda pieces of it. Quick review of the budget development timeline and milestones. The input that we've gathered up to this point. Slide on enrollment. And then the preliminary budget for the general operating fund, as well as some notable items for other funds, and then next steps moving forward. So for the timeline and milestones, this is a slide that we've seen many times all the way back into September. These are the same dates that have been on here since the presentation made back in December, on December 10th. What I wanted to highlight were the 3 bars that I've added to it. The red bar, which is where we are today, the April 14th board meeting, presenting the preliminary budget to the board. We have been moving forward. We've allocated staff. The gray bar that kind of runs under February, March, and April, rolling out staffing allocations. So that's a significant commitment of the budget already. The purple bar was roughly where the legislature would have completed their normal 120 days from when they started back in January. I have a screen that's hiding the next bar, the green bar. That's the projected May 30th end that has been proposed for the state or the legislature providing the budget to the governor for signature. I believe they have through June, if they needed to meet their 120 non-consecutive days for the legislature. So there's a possibility that it could drag out, but at least by the end of May, we'll have a much better idea of where things stand. Next, we have the budget development input. So these are the groups that have been worked with over really the entire school year. The District Accountability Committee and their recommendations, they did a pretty thorough process back in October, November, December to pull forward their recommendations from schools, and they presented those to the board. The school stakeholders are part of that with the school accountability committees providing input to DAC. The principal advisory committee, so we meet regularly with PAC, and they're constantly providing input on expenditures and budget items in the district. Latino Parent Advisory Council has been working with the superintendent on providing input on the strategic plan and the initiatives that are included in that, which are driving the budget. The Superintendent's Budget Advisory Committee, we had a meeting actually the day before things shut down back on Thursday, March 12th. We went through the process of reviewing the strategic plan and getting input on the strategic initiatives that are part of the budget. Certainly the public comments that have been at school board meetings over the year, superintendent's school visits. He's had many school visits, talking to teachers and school administrators, getting feedback. District Parent Council. We've had 13 separate topics at 10 different school board meetings and work sessions related to budget and budget development. And then the superintendent's cabinet went through a pretty thorough process of discussion and generating ideas for budget input. This is just a review of the work sessions and board meetings and discussion topics. So going all the way back to September, the process and those milestones, the strategic plan, long-term outcome metrics, that was a topic that came up numerous times. So again, focusing on the strategic plan and how the budget development process ties in with that. Work session on student data, privacy and technology policies, operational and customer service KPIs, which are a component of really driving the operational activities of the district to become better and more efficient. An update on strategic initiative 6A, culturally responsive best practices. Continuing into December and January, we had our official budget development milestones information item. In January, the DAC budget recommendations provided at a board meeting. The end of January, we reviewed the draft strategic financial plan and had a discussion on that. We did talk about the uniform mill levy ballot item that is unlikely to move forward, I would say, at this point in time. A update on strategic initiative 3C, the academic return on investment. Again, just bringing back the idea that we're constantly coming back to the development of the strategic plan in the budget development process. We had our work session on the second quarter and mid-year analysis, projecting for year end. The Connect Me internet connectivity topic that was just a consent item. And then again, another board meeting in February for the strategic plan long-term outcome metrics. So that's about the point where the formal meetings that may have happened after that kind of stopped for the most part, but certainly a lot of budget development, input, feedback, data points for pulling things together for this year, for next year. For enrollment, so this is just a very high level summary of the projected enrollment. We're projecting a decline for next year, a little over 200 students. It's kind of spread across both general fund schools and charter schools. It's a less than a 1%, it's about a 0.7%, 0.8% decline overall in students. Now digging into the budget numbers for the preliminary budget. So these are the topics that I'll go through: revenues, transfers, expenditures, pending legislative impacts, one-time sources and uses, and a little summary for the general fund, and then some notable items on other funds, and then next steps moving forward. So right now we're projecting a 0% increase in per pupil revenue. So what that'll mean is there'll be a inflationary increase, the 1.9% consumer price index inflation number for Colorado will be applied to base funding. It'll roll through the School Finance Act, and then the negative factor will be increased to offset that with a net zero impact. The projected declining enrollment will have a loss of per pupil revenue associated with that. On the mill levy override front, the 25% mill levy override is applied to total program funding before the negative factor is applied. So we will actually see a growth in that, even though per pupil revenue will be potentially flat. We'll still see some benefit from that inflationary increase. Small increase in categorical funding. That's the host of categorical funds from gifted and talented to CTE, English language proficiency, and special education. Decline in specific ownership tax. This is non-equalized specific ownership tax. The equalized is a component of the School Finance Act, but the non-equalized is what we get to keep. That's car registrations. And then net slight change of $100,000 for other miscellaneous revenues. So overall, a flat revenue for the district in the general fund. For transfers, so charter schools, again, with a 0 increase in per pupil revenue, they'll see a 0% increase for charter schools. The mill levy adjustment, so as the mill levy is applied for that pre-negative factor total program, it does go up, and charter schools will share in a piece of that. Risk management, we have an increase in property and liability insurance premiums, so that's going up a little bit. And then other transfers, transportation, preschool, so essentially no planned additional transfers there. Typically in preschool, we would see something if with per pupil revenue, if that went up, there would be a transfer there. But again, since that's flat, just want to point that out. So a little increase overall in ongoing transfers, those other funds. For compensation, we're projecting a 0% increase with a cost of living adjustment. So that's across all employees. This is consistent with language that we have in contracts that says that will provide a cost of living increase commensurate with the inflation number to the extent that we see that revenue in an increase in per pupil revenue. So if there's not an increase in per pupil revenue, there's not a commensurate increase in a cost of living adjustment. We have built in movement on salary schedules for all employees. That's a net number, both movement steps, lanes, and then turnover savings from staff retiring. The retirement, para retirement rate is going up. It's 0.5% for the employer. That's $1.3 million. Employees will also see a rate increase of 1.25%. That's a combination of both the statutory increase that was in place as well as the automatic adjustment that was part of the para reforms back in the last restructuring of para. So it was 0.75% increase was the statutory increase, and then the 0.25 is an increase based on the automatic adjustment. And then we have an increase for health and dental insurance. The 3.8% is 2 times the inflation rate. So that's just under $1 million. So $5 million in compensation adjustments overall for all staff. For expenditures, we have 3 special ed items that have been added to the budget. Pre-K special education paraeducators for our pre-K classrooms. That's 2 FTE. 2 intensive classrooms. So this is 1 elementary and 1 middle school. Intensive classrooms, again, as we're seeing expansion in the number of special ed students in the district. The IDEA grant backfill. So what that is in the current year, 2019-20, we used some of the carryover funds from the grant to fund positions, the special ed positions. And since the caseload has not gone down, we need to continue those positions. So those are getting funded out of the general fund for next year. And then as we are seeing the declining enrollment, so we built in the shifting of allocated staff, both teachers and paraeducators. So that's a savings of $1 million there. So a net $400,000 budget adjustment for those items. Some small adjustments, other adjustments in ongoing expenditures, the central kitchen. So as that's coming online, we have utilities and custodial expenses for that. While we are removing the production kitchens out at the schools and consolidating all that in the central kitchen, there's not additional custodial allocations going to those production kitchens at the schools. And they will still have serving kitchens going on as well. So this is a net overall increase. We do expect some operational efficiencies in the food service program as that gets underway, but we're not betting on that just yet. We'll see how that program rolls out. Some other small fees and contract items going up, utilities. The Safety Vortex is a module for one of our software systems that we're adding to improve our reporting and tracking related to the Blair Davis Act and the Safety Vortex process around that. The Justice High building, I want to point this out. So as the purchase was made for the Justice High building and bringing them on board in now a district-owned facilities, the district pays for the utilities, maintenance, upkeep, custodial for that facility. In that miscellaneous revenue line, Justice High will be paying the district per pupil amount for those expenses. So instead of having a mortgage payment, they'll have a payment to the district for those costs. So total of budget adjustments of about $800,000 between those 2 sections. So here's the little summary of that. A little less revenue. We have identified in here a transfer to the Operations and Technology Fund of $6 million to help balance the budget. So overall, it's currently not a balanced budget. It's about $700,000 upside down. Not an insurmountable number, and certainly will continue to look at revenue line items, expenditure line items as we go through this third quarter analysis to see if that will balance itself out overall, but not a insurmountable place to be at this point in time. For one-time expenditures, we're proposing a $2 million staffing reserve, both to deal with enrollment fluctuations or students just not coming into the right packages, or class sizes, and any grants that might have shortfalls in them. Unemployment insurance. So we're self-funded for our unemployment insurance. So this is just a bit of a safety net for us to fund any payments we might have. As we've downsized some staff just from the declining enrollment, it's putting that aside. It's not a premium payment. These are just direct payments. So if the expenses don't show up, then we won't have these expenses, but this is just putting that in there for to make sure that we have it available. UVA partnership, so expanding that to Cole Elementary, so a contract for that. And then 2 items, the strategic plan implementation. This is for phase 1 and phase 2 initiatives. And then also remediation and intervention for responding to the impacts to students that we really won't see until the fall, kind of what remediation might be needed with students. So that's setting some dollars aside to help address that, planning ahead for that. Couple other items, so temporary transportation routes, so Pioneer, Manhattan, and I can't read the other one underneath there, I'm just drawing a blank. Monarch K8. So these are routes that were in place in this current year that we're continuing for next year as we work through the uniform bell schedule and what efficiencies and alignments we can come up with that. And then a couple of items, indoor air quality. So we have the final year of the contract for that indoor air quality with the University of Tulsa. And then some badging for employees, students, and visitors to sort of improve our badging ID process. And then, of course, Tabor and contingency for those new expenditures overall. So with that, we projected to have $9.2 million available when we did the mid-year projection. So spending about 3.7 of that and ending 5.5 million. So again, as we go through that third quarter analysis to see what adjustments, both positive or negative to that estimated ending fund balance, and give us an idea as we move into finalizing the budget. Other funds, so 2 other funds really have significant changes, I would say. So the Operations and Technology Fund, again, I mentioned the $6 million expenditure transfer from the General Operating Fund. Just a reminder that we have our $4 million ERP implementation cost. We have that in there as a reserve in the current year. We'll be bringing forward actual expenditures for next year. We have the contract to begin the implementation of that. We'll bring that forward at the next board meeting. That'll be spread over 2 fiscal years, so roughly half and half for that as we get started into the fall. We have an additional $500,000 one-time expenditures for the transition for that ERP system while we're doing the implementation. So these are things like software packages that'll get rolled into the functionality, will get rolled into the new system, but we have to keep paying on the current software, and which will help offset the ongoing costs of that down the road, as well as the higher cost for the system itself that we, as we're rolling it out, we're paying for the higher cost in that transition. And so this is just buying a couple of years, again, also spread over a couple of years of that implementation. And then we're also putting in a reserve for the implementation. So this, think of it as a contingency reserve like you would have on a construction project. So this is not identified to be spent as of yet. And certainly any expenditures beyond what's in the contract, if there are change orders or things like that, those will come to the board. But this is just sort of planning ahead and operating in a way that makes sense for a large project like this. For risk management, the $2 million transfer for that property and liability insurance that I mentioned earlier. So next steps. So the budget that's that I just walked through with that zero increase in PPR funding is really due to the best information that we have at this point in time. So with the December revenue forecast that had inflation built into it, that was the governor's proposal, actually included a buy down of the negative factor, an improvement in funding. They had $830 million to spend at the legislature. About half of that was would have gone to TABOR refunds because we were going over the TABOR cap. And the other half roughly was available to be spent. So with the March 16th revenue forecast, that number came down to about 27 million in new money to be able to spend at the legislature. So that really took care of the need for any TABOR refunds, but also really wiped out the prospects of seeing an inflation adjustment to per pupil revenue. So we got an update on April 3rd that there would be $1.9 billion less money, again, from that December forecast for the legislature to spend. So the discussion started happening about expecting per pupil revenue reductions. The stimulus funding has not yet been included in the state discussions. We know that it's something like 2.3 billion that's available to the state just based on the state population and distribution of those funds. For pre-K 20, so all the way through higher ed, there's about $330 million that's been identified. And so again, that hasn't been built in to the projections as of yet. To note that for each $100 million in statewide reductions in the School Finance Act, it's about $3.5 million impact to Boulder Valley, as we're about 3.5% of the total funding and total students, because we're pretty close to the statewide average in funding. So on May 12th, the Office of State Planning and Budgeting and the Legislative Council staff will do an updated economic forecast, and they'll have a much better idea of what the economic data is showing, the job loss that's happened. Those will start certainly impacting the revenue collections. It hadn't really hit at the time of the March 16th forecast. And also starting to roll in the stimulus funding and what's available to be rolled out. So we've really come up with 3 scenarios going forward. The flat funding, which is the current scenario that I just walked through. A 2.5% funding cut, which would be about a $6.4 million reduction to that baseline of where we are. The A suggestion, there's certainly others that could be had, but a suggestion would be to fund a half of student staffing allocation for one time in the 2020-2021 school year. So that would allow us to continue with the staffing that's been allocated out to schools, not have to go back and change those allocations and plans that have been worked on for the last month or so. And then do an additional transfer to the Operations and Technology Fund, $4 million that essentially uses up all that we have available in there in ongoing funds. Then another scenario of a 5% funding cut, which would be a $12.8 million reduction for us, with a proposal of funding the staffing on a one-time basis of a full student per teacher across the district. That same transfer to the Ops and Tech Fund, And then we would need to dig into finding an additional $3.8 million in cuts to be identified. There's certainly a number of ways that that could be addressed, from staff reductions, other cuts, and there's a lot of work would go into finding that, and so that's something that's definitely on our radar and we're thinking about now. So as we look forward, I say the legislative session ends on June 30th, because that's about the latest that they could go. They have to have a budget passed and signed by the governor by June 30th. They've projected May 30th, but that's if everything goes as the legislature plans, I think we'll see that by the end of May. Certainly the School Finance Act and with the potential funding cuts around that. I don't see unfunded mandates or new programs coming out of the legislature for this year. I think trying to hold it together as much as possible is what they're going to focus on. So we certainly are in touch with our lobbyists and all the statewide organizations, CASE, and to keep an eye on things as we move forward. We have identified that May 26th board meeting as getting input, public input on the proposed budget. That's to be determined on how that actually functions and works in this digital environment. And then following up that with a study for the proposed budget at that point in time. And then continuing on the same path of budget adoption on June 9th. I'm suggesting that it's really not necessary to delay budget adoption later into June, because we will either be addressing a shortfall and working through that. We'll know the number that needs to be adopted by the board as the budget resolution, the maximum amount to be spent. And certainly we have the revised budget process all the way up through the end of January of 2021 to kind of bring all those changes together. So it's really not delaying, although there's a discussion of moving the adoption deadline even into June for districts. I'm not suggesting that that's necessary for us for where we are in the planning process. So that is the end of the presentation.
Okay. Thank you so much. And that's a lot of information and not a lot of good news, although I guess it could be worse. So board members, Richard, do you want to start with a question?
No questions.
Okay. Kathy?
Has there been any talk of I know we're not mid-year, but a rescission before the end of the budget year?
There has not been, at least publicly, I would say. I think that's a definite concern that it could be, but we're so late in the year. I think the legislature recognizes that that to take funding away from schools at this point in time would be extremely hard to address, with months to go and other revenue shortfalls and expenditures coming in from the coronavirus situation, that I believe they will do everything possible to not have a rescission at this point.
So there was some, I just wrote my questions, but I didn't write the numbers by it. So the remediation intervention numbers seemed really low. Do those include summer school? And those are just our best guesses now for what we're going to look like, or do those not include summer school?
It does not include summer school. I think there's discussion of what summer school looks like, whether the social distancing needs to continue into the summer. Do we need to change our summer program based on that, based on what recommendations there are? So we're starting the planning process for that, but summer school is a totally separate budget that's still in place. This is truly just a start really for what we may see going forward. I don't know if Rob, you want to add anything to that?
I think the idea was that we wanted to earmark some dollars. So when we came back in August, we would have some one-time funds to be able to fund extended learning opportunities throughout the fall semester. To Bill's point, is that will that be enough? I think time will tell, depending upon how long things go, to what extent we'll be able to actually hold summer school. The trick with this in this budget season is just be ready to be flexible. I think that Bill has done an incredible job of really putting together a budget based on the information we have, but we very much know that the information we have is going to change. But we did want to signal and at least earmark some dollars. As we think about coming back in the fall, we would have dollars that we could then push out to schools so they could extend learning opportunities for kids. In addition, above and beyond to what we always typically do.
And the only other question and concern I have is I only saw one place for public input, and I'm thinking we're going to have cuts. And that just feels like very limited public engagement around a very confusing situation for people. And so I'm just curious if am I misunderstanding that, or how are we going to be communicating this to our public and getting feedback? I know Billy went through everything that we've done to date, but quite frankly, none of that feels all that relevant right now. I mean, given that everything going forward is going to be so new. So I'm just wondering how we're going to communicate it and how we're going to give input opportunities to the public.
So the input up to this point has been really focused around the strategic plan and continuing the work of the strategic plan. Even the DAC input from back in January was heavily focused on that. I would use the strategic plan as the guiding document, the guiding principles around budget development, and making sure that as we move forward, whatever budget adjustments might need to be made, that we're doing that in a way that least impacts teaching and learning and advancement of kids' opportunities.
And I would add, Kathy, that certainly we're open to creating additional opportunities. Given our circumstances, we're just going to have to wait and see kind of to what extent what we've presented is going to have to significantly change. I do think that even though we didn't get to all of the input sessions that we wanted to, I have been to almost every single school and have information on what their priorities are for our district. We have recommendations from Latino Parent Advisory Council, very well thought out, specific recommendations. We do have input from DAC and certainly our internal groups with, between teacher advisory, superintendent's budget advisory, and principal advisory committee. We have some information. I think the trick will be, all of those conversations were under the premise of us having some additional money, and what would we prioritize? And so when you think about making cuts, depending upon how deep you have to cut, you start to really have limited options, quite frankly. But we spend 90% of our money as a district on people. And if we're faced with additional cuts beyond up to and beyond 5%, I think we will certainly be working closely with our associations, with our internal folks, but there'll be a lot of tough decisions that'll need to be made, for sure.
Yeah, I get it that we have very limited time, but it just feels like the messaging needs to be really clear that we will seek, if we get to that, that there's opportunities for additional community input, other than just the one touch point that I saw highlighted. That's all.
Well, and we'll also have a board meeting with public participation, presumably on June 9th. So depending on what kind of information we have available by then, we could add language that also showcases it as a budget public comment as well. But beyond that, I don't see where we would have public comment, because I don't think we'll have information until after May 12th. And then we want to approve it on June 9th. So it's a pretty short runway. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
So if we approve it on June 9th, that doesn't really seem like we're asking for input the same day as we're approving it. So I know it's fluid. I just want to make sure that we give as much opportunity as we can for when we know, and I get that there's so limited time between the time the legislature tells us and we have to go.
But we will have 2 opportunities for public comment. So if they, I mean, best practice is probably not to, we'll have 1 2 weeks prior to the June 9th meeting, or 2.5 weeks prior. And we could add another meeting depending on what happens on the May meeting and depending on what it looks like. We also, I think, we either canceled or are going to cancel the June 26th meeting. We can either go back and put it back, but we'd have to understand what we'd really gain, because we just may not even have that many choices anyway. So let's all think about it. Do you have other questions, Kathy?
No, thanks.
Donna?
No, I don't have additional questions. I think Kathy brought up several. Rob already has addressed them. Thanks.
Kitty?
I just want to thank you, Bill, for all the extra work you've had to do with this monkey wrench that's been thrown into things. And just again, you're just another person in your team, or more people who are doing a really good job for us in really difficult situations. Thank you.
Lisa? Stacy? Okay, and then my next question is, do we think that the numbers will be firm that we can approve on June 9th? That is the idea, right?
Firm enough, I would say. To the extent that the budget resolution and appropriation resolution is a total dollar amount, right? We will have a good idea of what that number is. To the extent that if we got information on June 8th that identified some different number that we had to address, we could certainly make that change on the fly to the resolution amount, and then have that be a expenditure reduction that would be identified basically over the next 3 months, that we would come back and report to the board what has happened in August when we get back together, rather than trying to change that within just 2 weeks between June 9th and June 26th or whatever it is. So the opportunity is for the board to adopt the dollar amount that is the budget, and that any adjustments that would need to be made, the staff would go to work on and come back with details on what those changes were in August.
Okay. And one of the reasons we're canceling June 26th is that by that time, pretty much our community is not as engaged. So because school gets out on May 24th or 23rd, and it starts getting we don't get a lot of engagement after that date. I'm not sure anyone's going to be going anywhere during the month of June. So we could put the meeting back. And if we really felt like it is too big of a gap between the 9th and, August 8th or whenever we get back, we could theoretically meet in July because we have this virtual possibility. I mean, that'd be pretty unusual, but I just want to throw it out there that we're a little more flexible than we have been historically. And that's it. Okay. Any other questions on the budget presentation? No? Okay. So then our next item is agenda setting. And just a comment that we have a prioritization meeting that's coming up. So this is, again, as a reminder, this is where when we have ideas that we want to talk about, how we prioritize our thoughts and what comes next on the schedule. Of course, this coronavirus has changed everything, but we're still going to pursue that meeting. And are there any other new items or RFIs that people are thinking about? Lisa?
Yeah, I wonder if at the next meeting we could talk a little bit about, we know in traditional learning, obviously, that we have a sizable achievement gap and we have disproportionate discipline. Is that something we can look at in terms of what's been happening the last few weeks, maybe hearing from Ari's team about the families he's been working with and what their experiences have been, what challenges they're coming up against, whether they're feeling welcome, and whether we have any information on whether students of color who are submitting incomplete work or feeling confused about assignments, are they feeling like they're getting equitable and equal treatment to our white students? Are we seeing that things seem to be working well across those lines? Just sort of anything in that arena, I'd love to hear more about.
Okay, and do you want to do that with an RFI?
I can, if that would be easier. I don't know if it would be worthwhile to have somebody pop in our next meeting and just talk a little bit about some of what's going on, because I feel like I have lots of questions I could ask, but rather than ask specific questions and have somebody spend hours answering them, it might be nice just to have somebody come by and talk for a bit, but whatever you prefer.
The RFI is nice because it just kind of tracks it so that the questions are captured in your language. Rob?
And I'd also share, we do have an update from Ari's team, the 6B work from the strategic plan. Lisa, I think that we can potentially, if you submit an RFI, we'd be able to work some of that information in as we think about how is the work working, how is the work continuing to move on in regards to bullying, disproportionate discipline, and some of the efforts that we're really continuing to hope to land by the end of this year. So it might fit very nicely there.
Nice. Kathy?
Great, thank you.
It seems like at some point it would be nice to have a conversation because it feels like we're at an opportunity where we could reset some things so that when we come back, we don't keep doing the same things we've been doing in the past. And it might be really interesting to get some feedback from you, Rob, and staff about new ways to think about things when we start in the fall, because I just think we can't keep doing things the way we have been. And this is a nice opportunity to kind of re-examine that.
Other thoughts or items for Richard?
I raised my hand.
That's easier than the button.
Well, I did use the button. But anyway, I do concur because I did submit the RFIs and I've been waiting to find out what are we doing with all of that stuff. I mean, I submit RFIs and then what happens? I mean, it seems like they just don't, they disappear someplace. You know, I would like to have conversations in terms of some of the things that I've been seeing in terms of the disproportionate discipline practices or actions that have been taken. So at what point do we actually sit down and talk about this?
Well, and part of that's in the strategic plan initiative, right, Rob? Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know that there has been a lot of conversation, certainly over the past few months. We've been having these conversations for the past year. What I will tell the board and the public is that you will see new discipline codes of conduct, new protocols around bullying. All of those things will be in place as we start to begin to think about next year. It does take time to do those things. Certainly our team has been hard at work. We do have that planned as a presentation for the board. And so potentially we could present, and then after that, if there's additional questions, certainly be happy to answer that. But please rest assured, I'm as passionate about this as you are. There are things in our system, and Kathy, to your point, there are systems in our district that have been failing our kids. And we're looking to not only take advantage of the work we were doing in the strategic plan, but also this opportunity, as Kathy mentioned, to do some resetting on those things.
Other thoughts? Okay, well, with that, I think we can adjourn our first virtual meeting. So, bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Adios.